Hello and welcome to Now You Know More. My name is Janine, and this video is the third and final part of women executed in the United States. Today we'll be looking at the most recent executions, those that have stirred significant controversy and debate. These cases often involve complex issues, particularly concerning mental health and the ethical considerations of capital punishment. If you're new here, please consider subscribing so you can catch up on the previous videos as well. Kimberly McCarthy, born on March 18, 1961, became the 500th person executed by the state of Texas on June 26, 2013. Her case involved a brutal murder of her 71-year-old neighbor, Dorothy Booth, in Lancaster, Texas, during a robbery in 1997. While McCarthy was convicted solely for Booth's murder, she was also suspected in the deaths of two other elderly women in Texas, although she was never formally charged in those cases. This added layer of suspicion contributed to the notoriety of her case. The murder of Dorothy Booth was particularly violent and disturbing. Booth, a retired college professor, was found stabbed to death in her home. McCarthy was seen near the scene of the crime and was quickly identified as a suspect. Evidence at the trial indicated that McCarthy had entered Booth's home with the intent to rob her. The encounter turned violent, leading to Booth's tragic death. The details of the crime painted a picture of a desperate act fueled by robbery, leaving the community shaken. During her trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case, linking McCarthy to the crime scene and establishing a motive. The defense, however, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that reasonable doubt existed. The jury, after hearing all the evidence, found McCarthy guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to death. McCarthy's case raised concerns about the justice system and the death penalty, particularly given the nature of her crimes and the questions surrounding her involvement in the other deaths. Her execution, being the 500th in Texas, drew extra attention from media and advocacy groups, highlighting the ongoing debates about capital punishment in the United States. In her final moments, Kimberly McCarthy expressed a message of faith and hope, focusing on her spiritual beliefs. Texas had ceased offering special last meals to death row inmates. Because of that, McCarthy was served the regular prison dinner for her last meal. Her last words were, "This is not a loss, this is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." And she was pronounced dead at 6:32 p.m., adding another name to the long list of those executed in Texas. Suzanne Margaret Basso, born May 15, 1954, met her end on February 5, 2014. Her case is a chilling example of manipulation, greed, and extreme violence. Basso was one of 6 co-defendants convicted of a horrific torture and murder of Louis "Buddy" Musso, a mentally disabled man, in August of 1998. The motive behind this horrible crime was Musso's life insurance money, a testament to the depths of human depravity. The details of Buddy Musso's murder are particularly gruesome and disturbing. Basso and her accomplices subjected him to prolonged and sadistic torture before his death. He was beaten, starved, and forced to endure forms of abuse, all while being held captive. The perpetrator's goal was to collect the substantial life insurance policy and Social Security that named Basso as the beneficiary. The sheer brutality and calculated nature of the crime shocked even the most seasoned investigators and prosecutors. My next video will be of Suzanne Basso with an in-depth discussion of the crime and the motive, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. Basso's trial brought to light the extent of her involvement with her role in orchestrating the events that led to Musso's death. The prosecution successfully argued that Basso was the mastermind behind the plot, manipulating others to carry out the violent acts while she reaped the financial benefits. The defense, if any, was not noted. The jury found her guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death. Suzanne Basso's case raised serious questions about the exploitation of vulnerable individuals and the lengths to which some will go for monetary gain. The depravity of the crime and the exploitation of Musso's disability made the case particularly disturbing and garnered significant media attention. In her final hours, Suzanne Basso did not request a special meal, as Texas had ceased offering them. Instead, she ate the regular prison fare of baked chicken, fish, boiled eggs, carrots, green beans, and sliced bread. When asked if she had a last statement, she simply replied to the prison staff, "No, sir." She was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m., bringing an end to one of the most disturbing cases in Texas history. I just wanted to take a quick pause to thank you once again for watching my videos and supporting my channel. If you could please consider leaving me a comment on how you think I'm doing or how I might be able to improve the channel for you, your input is very important because I appreciate you being here with me. The tragic story of Devontae Williams, a 9-year-old boy who died of malnutrition and abuse in his Arlington, Texas apartment in 2004, stands as a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerability of children and the horrifying consequences of neglect. At the time of his death, Devontae weighed a mere 35 pounds, a shocking testament to the severe deprivation he endured. His body bore scars of unimaginable suffering, infected wounds from being bound by plastic cords, and other signs of physical abuse. Devontae's mother, Marcella Williams, and her partner, Lisa Ann Coleman, were arrested and charged with capital murder. Marcella Williams eventually entered a guilty plea in exchange for her sentence of life imprisonment, while Lisa Ann Coleman chose to go to trial. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. The details of Devontae's life and death painted a grim picture of isolation and abuse. He was essentially starved, and his body showed signs of chronic malnourishment. The physical evidence was overwhelming. His tiny frame and extensive scarring and the infected wounds all told a story of prolonged and systematic abuse. A bloodstain found on a golf club in the home further suggested physical violence. The fact that he had a healing tear where his ear meets the side of his head also points towards further abuse. Lisa Ann Coleman's trial brought to light the horrific conditions under which Devontae lived. The prosecution argued that both women were responsible for his death, whether through direct action or neglect. The defense, if any, was not well reported. The jury's verdict reflected the severity of the crime, and Coleman was sentenced to death. Lisa Coleman was executed by lethal injection on September 17, 2014. She was pronounced dead at 6:42 p.m., In her final moments, Coleman expressed love and encouragement for her friends and family watching through the window. She maintained her composure, smiling and nodding to her supporters, and said, "I'm all right. Tell them I finished strong." And then she mouthed a kiss and nodded to her witnesses before the lethal drug took effect. For her last meal, as was the policy in Texas at the time, she received the regular prison meal, which included fried pork chop, macaroni and cheese, carrots, green beans, navy beans, sliced bread, and a pineapple orange cake. The case of Devontae Williams remains a chilling reminder of the importance of protecting vulnerable children and the tragic consequences of abuse and neglect. It also brings up the difficult question of accountability. Kelly Gissendaner, born March 8, 1968, was executed September 30, 2015, in Georgia. Her case was particularly notable as she was the only woman on death row in the state at the time. Kelly was convicted of orchestrating the 1997 murder of her husband Douglas. The details of the crime, her relationship with her lover, and the legal proceedings that followed drew significant public attention. Kelly was 28 years old when her husband Douglas, 30, was stabbed to death by her lover, Gregory Owen. Kelly had met Owen at a bar, and the two began an affair. She later recruited Owen to kill her husband, promising him a share of the insurance money. Owen carried out the murder, and Kelly attempted to make it appear as though it was a random crime. However, her involvement was quickly discovered. During the trial, Gregory testified against Kelly as part of a plea bargain. He received a life sentence, sparing him from the death penalty. Kelly's defense focused on portraying her as a victim of abuse and manipulation by Owen, arguing that she was not the mastermind of the murder. However, the jury found her guilty of murder and sentenced her to death. Kelly's case sparked conversations about gender roles, domestic abuse, and the culpability of individuals in relationships where power dynamics are complex. Supporters argued that she was a victim who deserved leniency, while others maintained that she was responsible for her actions. Despite appeals and clemency requests, her sentence was upheld. In her final hours, Kelly was visited by family and a spiritual advisor. She requested a specific last meal: cheese dip and chips, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade. As she was being prepared for execution, she cried, prayed, and sang Amazing Grace. Her last words were a message of love and forgiveness. "I love you, Sally, and I love you, Susan. Let my kids know I went out singing Amazing Grace." and tell the Gissendaner family I am so sorry that amazing man lost his life because of me, and if I could take it back, if this would change it, I would have done it a long time ago. But it's not, and I just hope they can find peace, and I hope they find some happiness. God bless you. She was pronounced dead at 12:21 a.m. Lisa Marie Montgomery, born on February 27, 1968, was executed on January 13, 2021, for one of the most horrific crimes in recent memory, the 2004 murder of Bobby Joe Stinnett in Skidmore, Missouri, and the kidnapping of Stinnett's unborn child. Montgomery's case was particularly chilling due to the calculated nature of the crime, the deceptive involvement, and the sheer brutality of her actions. Montgomery met Bobby Joe Stinnett online in a chat room called Ratter Chatter, using the alias Darlene Fisher. She built a relationship with Stinnett, feigning her own pregnancy to gain Stinnett's trust. They exchanged emails and chatted online about their pregnancies, laying the groundwork for Montgomery's horrifying plan. Under the pretext of wanting to buy a rat terrier puppy, Montgomery arranged to meet Stinnett at her home on December 16, 2004. Once inside Stinnett's home, Montgomery strangled the pregnant woman with a pink neon rope and then performed a crude C-section, cutting the premature infant from Stinnett's womb. She then attempted to pass the infant, later named Victoria Joe Stinnett, off as her own. Bobby Joe Stinnett's mother, Becky Harper, found her daughter in a pool of blood about an hour after the attack. The scene was so gruesome that Harper described it as if her daughter's stomach had exploded. The next day, Montgomery was arrested at her farmhouse in Kansas. The newborn baby, Victoria Joe, was recovered and returned to her father. Montgomery's defense team presented evidence of her long history of mental illness and claimed that she was delusional and suffered from pseudocyesis, a false belief of believing pregnant. They argued that her actions were driven by these mental health issues, not by a rational plan. However, the prosecution argued that the crime was premeditated and that Montgomery had maliciously planned the abduction and murder. Lisa Marie Montgomery was executed by lethal injection after the Supreme Court declined to hear her final appeal. Her execution was highly controversial due to her history of mental illness and the unusual nature of her crime. Many argued that her mental state should have been the mitigating factor, while others believed that the severity of her crime warranted the death penalty. When asked if she had any last words, she simply replied no. There is also no reports about what she ordered for her last meal. And that is the end of part 3. Take care, stay safe, and thanks for listening.